What is going on, Trash Talkers? We're back with another episode for you. In today's video, we're going to give you our starts and sits for fantasy football week 4. All that and much more coming your way right now! All right, everyone, welcome back, and thank you for tuning in. Again, we are joined by the Fantasy 4-Pack this week by Matt Vitale, who you saw back in week 1. Matt, why don't you tell us a little bit about your show and what we can expect this week?
We just wrapped up shooting our the second half of the game slate, so we've been kind of mixing things up, trying to get a little more streamlined for people out there because you're busy. So, basically, this week we were trying to go through and kind of rattle off some important names on each team that we think are interesting to talk about. Whether they're starts, sits, whether you believe in them, where you think they should be, because different teams are in different positions, different leagues are different. So I like to, if I'm talking about a player that I think is, maybe startable, I try and give him an idea of like, oh, this guy's a high flex. So it'd be fine. I'd be comfortable starting my flex. Or he's a low end flex, or he's just a dart throw. Like I need points, like a Van Jefferson for the Rams. He's a great dart throw, but he's still risky.
Absolutely. And, you guys can go and check out their content. They are also on YouTube, the Fantasy 4-Pack. Check them out. The link to their YouTube will be in this description below, as well as their Twitter feed. And they have incredible insight and a lot of knowledge for the game of fantasy football. So definitely check them out. And yeah, all right. So why don't we get into today's video, and let's start off, Nick, with our starts for the quarterback position this week. Who do you have starting for your quarterback?
I have Derek Carr this week. I really like the matchup for Derek Carr, divisional opponent in the Los Angeles Chargers. And I think this is going to be a very high-scoring game. I think it's going to be a shootout. It's a national televised game on Monday night. I think this is going to be another big game where Derek Carr shines in the spotlight. He's going to put up big yardage with Darren Waller and Brian Edwards and Henry Ruggs. I think those guys have plenty of playmaking ability. The Chargers secondary looks very good, but I think that they're going to have to keep up with Justin Herbert all game long, and Derek Carr's going to be throwing the ball a ton. He's had 2 400-plus yard games this season. I think that he continues to get big yardage, some big touchdowns. I really like the potential for Derek Carr this week.
With this week, I wanted to go with a little more. If you're in dire straits for quarterbacks, maybe you weren't able to get a Derek Carr, who I do think is a great start this week. I'm actually going with Ryan Tannehill. So people are definitely down on Tannehill. The fact he's missing his 2 top receivers. Why would you start a guy like that? Well, he's playing the Jets, and you can say, well, they're just going to run the ball a bunch. Well, last week we saw the same thing, and he only threw the ball 27 times, still came out with about 23.5 fantasy points. That's plenty good for a streaming starter. And like I said, the Jets defense does not scare me one bit. So even with limited options out there, I think there's definitely a way for him to be able to buoy your fantasy team if you're in dire straits.
And that is me in one of my leagues. I have been streaming quarterbacks left and right, and it is painful, to say the least.
Yes.
All right, who do you guys have for your sits so I can make sure I don't grab them?
Yeah, so my set of the week, it's probably no surprise, Ben Roethlisberger. I just don't like Ben Roethlisberger right now. Between him tripping over himself, not having his weapons around him, Chase Claypool is out for this game. Does look like Deontay Johnson will play, so that's a good sign. And Najee Harris is still there, going to rack up a ton of targets in his direction. I just think that even though the Steelers are going to be playing from behind because it is the Green Bay Packers, they just don't have the offensive line for Big Ben to throw behind, and he just doesn't have the reaction time to get past a solid defense that Green Bay has. I really don't like this matchup for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think Green Bay is going to absolutely trounce them. It is in Green Bay as well. I just don't like anything that Big Ben has to work with or has to offer.
Yeah, if you go back to my season preview for the Pittsburgh Steelers, I told you back then that Big Ben was one hit away from turning into complete dust, and he is right around that that mark. I mean, he can't even throw the ball more than 12 yards down the field. So I definitely like sitting him here. Vitali, who do you have for your sit at the quarterback position?
Yeah, well, I also agree. Big Ben's a great sit this week because people will be looking at how much he throws. So just putting that out there is great advice. Well, for me, I'm going to go with one that people could see as a potential bounce back candidate this week against a defense that has been struggling. I'm going with Matt Ryan against the Washington football team. The Washington football team is supposed to be one of the best defenses coming into this year, and they have looked porous at best. And people might be looking at this. Matt Ryan's got all of his options. There's not a lot of great streamers this week. Maybe this is when he finally has the get right game. Like, there's a lot of factors that definitely point towards him being a start. But for me, he's a sit because the Falcons' offensive line is awful. And yes, the Washington football team defense hasn't looked great. But the one shining point of this team is their D line. I think they're going to be getting through this line in droves and not letting Matt Ryan do what he does best, and that's connecting with Calvin Ridley for long bombs. So it's going to be short yardage. It's going to be some of the same. I'm sorry. I think just Matt Ryan's washed, and this is not the get right game for him. And I mean, maybe they can figure it out later, but I think they're going to need to add some kind of something's going to have to happen with this offensive line for me to have any kind of confidence in them.
Absolutely, I agree 100%. And maybe they can go get a David DeCastro off of free agency. But at the end of the day, maybe they should have taken a quarterback instead of getting Kyle Pitts, who seemingly has not worked out so far, mainly because of the fact that Matt Ryan can't do anything and the offensive line can't protect anyone. So
Yeah. Or Panay Sewell was sitting right there for him.
Perfect opportunity for them, and they just squandered it. But
Yep.
I like both the starts and sits from both of you guys, and definitely some good insight here. Let's move on to the running back position. And Nick, who are you starting at your running back?
Yeah, so I didn't like Big Ben, but I mentioned Najee Harris. I really like Najee Harris this week. He had 19 targets last week and caught 14 of those targets. I think it's another big game. Without Chase Claypool there, Big Ben doesn't have many people to work with, and Najee's just going to get that many targets. The Green Bay Packers are absolutely porous at the position, allow a ton of yards. I think Najee, if he's going to explode this season, this is the game it's going to happen. Green Bay's a very good matchup for him, and I like his potential in the running and receiving game.
Yeah, absolutely. And Vitali?
For me, I'm going to go ahead and target the Browns and Vikings game. I love Kareem Hunt this week. Odell Beckham's still working his way back into this offense. The tight ends have kind of just been, they're using all of them, so no one's really standing out. And it's been the running backs who have been the core of this offense. Nick Chubb's going to do Nick Chubb things. This is going to be just a great game for him. But we've seen before, which I think this one's going to get away from Minnesota. And when that happens for the Browns, they just put Kareem Hunt in the fourth and just let him go to work. So the quality of targets he's getting out of the backfield, just the amount of use he gets, and the amount they just lean on the running back position as a whole, I think he's a smash start this week.
I like Kareem Hunt, and I've said for weeks, and Nick can attest to this. I think that he is going to eat away at Nick Chubb's opportunities. They work great in tandem, and don't get me wrong, they're both absolute quality starts. But Kareem Hunt is turning into one of those guys that you can rely on week after week, and he's getting you a point output that you can rely on versus somebody who's going to put you maybe 5 points or 15, 20. 25 points. So he can definitely get you the points you need, and I like the start there a lot. Let's move over to our sits, and Nick, who you got?
Yeah, so my sit of the week is the rising star Tony Pollard. I think that Ezekiel Elliott started to thrive in that game last week, and I think that Tony Pollard is going to be less of a threat in this matchup. They're facing the Carolina Panthers, and I think that means that the Dallas Cowboys are going to be in another shootout. I think this is going to be a big passing attack for the Dallas Cowboys, and Ezekiel Elliott is going to be in there because that's who Dak Prescott trusts to protect him in the pass game, and then he loves to dump it off to him. Tony Pollard, he's been getting worked into the receiving game as well, but Ezekiel Elliott is taking the majority of snaps, and that percentage is growing week over week. I think Ezekiel Elliott is going to be more of a full-time running back to what we're used to seeing from him, and Tony Pollard's going to have more of a backup role.
Matt?
Yeah, I think that's great advice out there. But for me, I'm actually going to go a little bit more bold with a running back that was taken to be a high-end RB2, Mr. David Montgomery. I honestly think you need to sit him this week because that Bears offense looks horrible. And I think that's even being generous, just saying horrible. The Bears could barely get any form of offense out there. So I don't feel comfortable relying on an offense this bad where if Justin Fields looks that bad again, The box is going to be stacked. We're going to see another 3 yards per carry out of David Montgomery. Maybe he squeaks his way to 50 yards, and I would be surprised if he got a touchdown. And that kind of production for your RB2 can kill your week. You're down 5 points against someone who might get 10, 12. Even that's just a mediocre game. Now you're already in the whole 6 points, and you have to make that up somewhere else. Like, do yourself a favor, sit your Bears this week. Even against, like, that's the other reason I wanted to bring him up, is because they're playing Detroit and people have been able to score on Detroit, but Detroit's looking better and better each week, and like I said, I can't in good conscience start any of these Bears until I know that this offense is in good hands. And honestly, they need to lose this week because Matt Nagy needs to be out of this offense as fast as possible. And honestly, if the quarterback room keeps being this bad, I think they should go out and get Cam Newton because he'd be a great mentor for Justin Fields.
I think that's incredible, and the Chicago Bears were definitely a team we talked about in our Cam Newton video as a possible team that should definitely go out and get him. You talked about Justin Fields, that they have very similar ways of playing, especially back when Cam was an MVP back in 2015. He plays a lot of the way that we see Justin Fields, a lot of balls down the field, a lot of scrambling out of the pocket, making plays with his feet. So I like what this guy can do, and hopefully they can get something right in front of him. This offensive line is atrocious, and it's hard to sit a guy like David Montgomery just based on where you drafted him, but I understand the sit. I mean, I don't trust the Bears as far as I can throw them, and it's just one of those things that you got to just suck up and do, unfortunately. Now let's step over to the wide receivers, and Nick, why don't you get us started with your start of the week?
Yeah, so my start wide receiver of the week is going to be Tim Patrick. It's a big matchup for the Denver Broncos against the Baltimore Ravens. Lamar Jackson is looking better. He's starting to practice, and he will play eventually. I think that the Baltimore Ravens are going to be able to put up some points. This is going to not be a game where the Denver Broncos can just run the ball out. This isn't the New York Jets. So we're going to see Teddy Bridgewater throwing the ball a lot, and I think one of his biggest weapons is Tim Patrick. Cortland Sutton's going to be taken care of by their number one corner, Marlon Humphreys, and that leaves Tim Patrick to work with Teddy Bridgewater. He had 5 catches for almost 100 yards last week with minimal targets. He's going to get more targets. He's going to have more times to produce more yardage. I really like everything that he has to work with. He's going to, with KJ Hamler being hurt, Jerry Jeudy, there's more targets to go around. I think Tim Patrick is going to get a lot of that share.
So for me, I was kind of going back and forth with a few different guys here, but honestly, my start for this week at the wide receiver position is Devonta Smith for the Eagles. They're coming off of an ugly game. This team needs to start showing that they're legit, and especially Jalen Hurts. We were able to see him get over 300 yards, which was amazing for him, especially the guy who has that running talent. And people are looking at this team saying, well, they only have one receiving option, so everyone can just kind of key in. But that's the other thing. It's a very truncated target tree. So almost all of these targets are going to them, and they're playing Kansas City. So we know that it's going to be a pace-up game. We know the Eagles are going to have to throw, and this KC defense has looked exploitable. So I look to see Devonta Smith to get just peppered with targets. The catch percentage might not be there, but I think the depth of target will be there. The offense will stay on the field just well enough because of the fact that Jalen Hurts keeps drives alive with his feet. So I like him in this matchup just as they're going to have to use him, and he's their most reliable weapon this season.
Yeah, I love the Slim Reaper, Devonta Smith. That guy is absolutely incredible. And, he was great in college. He has not been unleashed in the NFL. And I think against a porous Kansas City defense, especially on the back end, where people overhype Tyrann Mathieu. I'll say it out loud. I don't think he is nearly the quote unquote honey badger that he once was. I think that they are definitely exploitable, and this is an opportunity for Jalen Hurts to put the Eagles on the map and say, we are here and we're going to compete in the NFC East. On the other hand, Nick, I like Tim Patrick. This is a very small window in which Tim Patrick becomes a relevant target for you to start on your team. You've probably been carrying him because he's had some upside, and he had a decent game last week. But right now, this is the opportunity to start him because you only have a couple of weeks before the Broncos start getting healthy, and then he takes another back seat back to where he was in the depth chart. So I like both of those starts. Now, who you guys want to sit and really ruin my lineup?
I'm going to the other side of this Denver Broncos Baltimore Ravens game. I'm taking Hollywood Brown as a sit this week. I just don't like the matchup at all. Hollywood Brown had some big drops against Detroit, and I don't even think he's going to have those open opportunities this week. He's now matched up one-on-one with Patrick Surtain II, who's been one of the best rookie corners so far. He's one of the best lockdown man-to-man corners in the NFL right now, and Hollywood Brown's going to be absolutely absolutely smothered by this entire secondary, one of the best secondaries in the NFL. They're going to be covering him a lot. It's really only him and Mark Andrews still, even with some of the receivers getting healthy. I just don't think that they're going to allow Lamar to throw on them. They're going to make sure that if he's going to win, it's going to be with his legs, and they're going to be able to stop the minimal weapons that Lamar has to work with. Hollywood Brown just doesn't have a good matchup this week.
You said come after your offer, so I'm going with another high-end wide receivers, a guy who just performed well, Mr. Mike Evans. I honestly do expect this game to be a little bit of a blowout. I do expect the Bucs to walk away with this one pretty well because the Patriots' offense just isn't there yet. But their defense is solid, and Antonio Brown is back. So I look at this one as J.C. Jackson's going to be all over Mike Evans, and we've seen Mike Evans disappear when he's got a top corner on him. So I like this one for Brady to look for the guy that's open, which he always does throughout his career. I think Chris Godwin and Antonio Brown are going to make their hay in this game, and he's just going to use the option that's open. Like the people are saying that, oh, Gronk's out, so that's a lot more touchdowns that could be going Mike Evans' way. It's like, well, there's still a guy named Cameron Brate behind Gronk who's been great for fantasy and just a great tight end. So I expect Cameron Brate to be able to step up in this role and be able to at least partially fill what Gronk's been doing. I don't expect the 2 touchdown upside we've seen a lot from the early weeks of Gronk, but Mike Evans here is as we've always known, he's huge boom, he's huge bust. So I am predicting a huge bust in the way of like a 2-point game where he's just, maybe he catches one, but like I said, I'm not going to gamble on that when you have the quality of targets that could just be going to 3 other guys on this team.
Absolutely. And as you talked about J.C. Jackson, well, J.C. Jackson was in the ear of Stephon Gilmore all weekend long, or really talking about how he can lock up Mike Evans because they are going to be paired one-on-one. Stephon Gilmore told him everything he needed to do to be successful. And that also comes with the direction of Bill Belichick and this defensive coordinators that have really done a great job with the new revamped Patriots. So I like sitting Mike Evans, and Nick, I'm in agreement with you. I wouldn't start any receiver going against the Denver Broncos. In fact, Hollywood Brown is so small, I think Patrick Surtain might just swallow him up whole. That this defensive secondary for the Broncos is absolutely stud packed and ready to go. I mean, they are so name deep, let alone just talent deep. I really like what they can do here, so I wouldn't start anyone against them. But as we continue, let's talk about the tight ends. And Nick, why don't you give me your start of the week for the tight end position?
Yeah, so I really like Mike Gesicki. I think he had a really big breakout game last week against the Las Vegas Raiders, and that's what Jacoby Brissett. I think that continues again this week. He's going to get a lot of targets, even with Will Fuller there and having all 3 receivers. That's Jacoby Brissett's position. He loves working with the tight ends, and Mike Gesicki is a very athletic tight end, very capable tight end. He just doesn't get targets with Tua out on the field. Tua's not there, and I really like the potential for Mike Gesicki to keep the steam rolling, continue what he was doing from last week.
So for my start this week, I'm going with Will Dissly on the Seahawks against the San Francisco 49ers. I'm usually not one to push. Like I said, I've always liked the tight ends for Seattle, but Russell Wilson has a very 1 and 2. He has 2 targets. That's who all of his targets go to. That's who you want to start. So it's always been DK and Lockett. But this week, DK's hurt, Lockett's hurt. So they're both going into this weekend. I know Lockett's carrying that questionable designation. DK's had the calf. So if either of those guys are limited and Russell needs to go elsewhere, we've seen Will Dissly perform in a big way last year before getting hurt. So I like him in this matchup where they're going to need to score against a San Francisco offense that's been pretty good itself. They're going to need to rely on somebody else to catch these balls. And like you said, with how bad tight end is, you could do a lot worse than Will Dissly this week.
Yeah, and I believe Gerald Everett is also hurt and probably not playing in this game. So
he is on the COVID list, yeah.
Oh, yeah, even better. So he's definitely not playing, and yeah, that opens up Will Dissly. And again, for somebody like myself in one of my leagues, tight end has been another streaming spot, and I've been going with Dallas Goedert for a little bit, but I think Will Dissly might have to be the guy that I pick up here because I like the matchup. The San Francisco 49ers struggle against tight ends, and I just believe that it's a good pick all around. All right, and for your sits, Nick, who do you have?
Yeah, so I have Dawson Knox. He's on a really big tear right now, back-to-back touchdowns in the last 2 weeks, and I just don't think it continues. Even though they're facing the Houston Texans, who are not a great defense, I think that this is where Josh Allen's going to try to really get going with the receivers. He's hit Cole Beasley a ton and gotten going with Emmanuel Sanders, but the connection with Stephon Diggs is not there from what we saw last year. I think they really want to get that going in this game. The Houston Texans really don't have a strong secondary. The only guy of name value is Justin Reed, and I expect for him to take on Dawson Knox in this one, really cover him up. That's going to really leave the wide receivers open to work with Josh Allen. Josh Allen's going to be able to take off as well. I just think that if you take away the touchdown from Dawson Knox, he's not performing very well, and he'll upset your team. He might even ruin your week if you start him and he doesn't get that touchdown for you.
Yeah, I mean, Frankie's going to cry big tears when he hears that. He's a big Dawson Knox guy. But yeah, you're right. There's just if the touchdown doesn't go his way, he could have just a terrible week. But for mine, like I said, I'm going high profile once again. A guy that you probably drafted in the 4th, 5th round, maybe. I'm going with Mr. Mark Andrews because as we were just talking about, this Broncos defense is looking great this year. Von Miller being back really improved them at just all levels. And that's what you expect from an impact player like him. And on top of that, you look at Mark Andrews' line this year. I mean, he's had one good game, and that was just because he got to 100 targets. That was against Detroit, which is a far more inferior team. This team just doesn't throw enough. And before we were saying, well, the times they do throw, they're going to Mark Andrews more and more. So that's why you were fading the wide receivers. Well, Sammy Watkins is there, and he's been getting just consistently targeted. Hollywood, for as much as I do agree that he is a sit this week, he's been getting his targets, and that's basically been to the detriment of Mark Andrews. So it's hard for me to recommend a tight end who's only getting about 5 or 6 targets a game going against a great defense like this, when you could easily get to the goal line and just see Lamar Jackson scoot one in or do another handstand flip into the end zone. Like, if you're just starting this guy basically on his name alone, I feel like people are just kind of putting the blinders on as far as his actual performance this year.
No, I agree. I think Mark Andrews was obviously taken as one of the top 3 or 4 tight ends in every fantasy draft. And when you took Mark Andrews, you assumed that he was just a plug and play and you never had to worry about him again. Well, every tight end outside of Darren Waller and Travis Kelce has given you reason to worry. And now you have to start paying attention to this awful grouping of tight ends that we have in the NFL that are just so inconsistent. You just got to throw something at the wall and see what happens. And that's where we get the Will Disleys of the world. That's where we get the Mike Gesicki's of the world. So I really like all of that. And Mark Andrews, again, we talked about this Denver defense. It's going to really crash down on this offense. They're going to make Lamar beat them doing what he does best, and they're going to take away all his weapons and take away all the game plan that they have. So it'll definitely be interesting, and I think Mark Andrews is going to really struggle in this one. But all right, well, I want to hear from you guys. Let us know in the comments down below who you want to see as starts and sits this week. Let us know if you have any lineup questions. We'd be happy to help. If you have any lineup questions you want to ask Matt and the Fantasy 4-Pack, feel free to go over to their channel and talk to them on Twitter as well. They'll be happy to help you with that. All right, well, that's going to be all for now. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Hit that notification bell. We go live every single day. That'll be all. Peace and love.